U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has confirmed that the United States will engage with Russia today regarding Ukraine's proposed 30-day ceasefire, a crucial step toward ending the ongoing war.
As far as the Russian reaction to it, that's really the question here. And that is, this was a few hours old. We're going to bring it to them directly. We're going to say that Ukraine is prepared to stop all battlefield activity and begin the immediate process of negotiating an enduring end to the war. And we'll see what their response is. If their response is yes, then we know we've made real progress and there's a real chance of peace. If their response is no, it would be highly unfortunate and it would make their intentions clear. So that's what we're hoping to hear.
Speaking from Ireland, Rubio emphasized the urgency of stopping hostilities and initiating peace negotiations. He stated that if Russia agrees, it could mark real progress, but if they reject the proposal, their true intentions will be clear.
The Russian response and urged them strongly to consider ending all hostilities, so people will stop dying, so bullets will stop flying, and so a process can begin to find a permanent peace. I think the first step in all this is the acceptance that there is no military solution to this conflict. Neither side can militarily achieve their maximalist gains, their maximalist goals. Neither side can achieve them through the military side. The only way this conflict can end is through negotiation. That's the only way you're going to have peace, is through negotiation. And so we need to start that process. And it is hard to start a process when people are shooting at each other and people are dying. And so our hope is that we can stop that, all these hostilities, and get to a negotiating table where both sides, over some period of time with a lot of hard work, can find a mutually acceptable outcome that, in the case of Ukraine, obviously secures their long-term prosperity and security. Suffice it to say, there's going to be multiple points of contact with the Russians to gauge, are they willing to do this or not? And as far as the conversations that were yesterday, yeah, when you sit down with a counterpart like Ukraine, we're not going to negotiate this publicly. We're not going to actually put out there sort of what we talked about, because in any negotiation, there's certainly an element where you don't want one side to be giving away all this leverage from a public perspective. We had a broad conversation about what it would, but I think the bulk of our conversation was what a negotiation process would look like in terms of not the specific conditions, but rather the timing of it, sort of the steps they would like to see taken. The Ukrainians made very clear that this isn't just about ending a war. They need to get their prisoners of war back. They need to get the children back. They'd like to see an exchange of prisoners of war. They'd like to see their children back. So there's all sorts of things tied to the humanitarian assistance is important as well. There are areas of Ukraine that have been badly damaged that require immediate assistance. So these are the sorts of things that we talked about as being inclusive in the negotiation process. So really the bulk of our conversation when we got to that stage of it was discussing the kinds of items that need to be on any negotiation agenda, even when we hopefully get there. There's different ways to construct a deterrent on the ground that prevents another war from starting in the future. We're not going to go in with any sort of preconceived notion. The bottom line is it needs to be something that makes Ukraine feel as if they can deter and prevent a future invasion. How that looks and how that's put together, that's what we're going to be talking about. If we can get to that stage. Again, right now we're just trying to get to the stage where there's actual diplomacy happening. Here's what we'd like the world to look like in a few days. Neither side is shooting at each other. Not rockets, not missiles, not bullets, nothing, not artillery. The shooting stops, the fighting stops, and the talking starts. That's what we want to see. What happens during that talking and how that evolves, I think we're going to have to be flexible and nimble and creative and patient and work hard at it and hopefully turn it into something that's concrete. You've covered, many of you have covered foreign policy for years. That's how these things happen, and they're not easy, and sometimes they're difficult to predict which way they're going to go in terms of the specifics of it. But we just want to get to that stage. That would be, for lack of a better term, a good problem to have to figure out how to negotiate a peace, because we're actually negotiating a peace while the shooting is stopped. Well, I think that a minerals deal is something that I think is beneficial for both countries. Certainly one of the things that provides for Ukraine's long-term prosperity and security is vibrant economic growth and development. If their GDP begins to grow, and that gives them a tremendous amount of leverage and power and the ability to fund their own defenses. So I think certainly any economic development for Ukraine is positive for their own future. Obviously, if the United States has a vested economic interest somewhere, we're tied to them on an economic front, we're in partnership with them on something, we will have an interest in the future of Ukraine as well. I wouldn't couch it as a security guarantee, but certainly if the United States has a vested economic interest that's generating revenue for our people as well as for the people of Ukraine, we'd have a vested interest in protecting it if it were to be challenged or threatened.
Prime
What
Minister
he said
Trudeau,
is it
Governor.
should become the 51st state from an economic standpoint. He says if they became the 51st state, we wouldn't have to worry about the border and fentanyl coming across because now we would be able to manage that. He's made an argument that it's their interest to do so. Obviously, the Canadians don't agree, apparently. But
Do you agree with that? Is that we're going to discuss that, becoming the 51st?
well, that's not what we're going to discuss at the G7, and that's not what we're going to be discussing in our trip here. So they're the host nation, and we have a lot of other things we work on together.
Meanwhile, tensions between the US and Canada have also surfaced, though Rubio dismissed speculation about territorial discussions at the upcoming G7 meeting. Stay tuned for updates on these key diplomatic
Over
developments.
Canada.